Mr. Chair and Ranking Member Peters for having this hearing today, and to Mr. Vogt and Mr. Lean, thank you for being here and thank you for your interest in service. Mr. Vogt, I want to start with a couple of questions to you. As the coronavirus pandemic unfolded across the United States, the president released his fiscal year 2021 budget request that called for a $9.5 billion cut to the Department of Health and Human Services, including massive cuts to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and the National Institutes of Health. You later amended the budget request for CDC and pandemic response, but you are still requesting billions of dollars in cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services for fiscal year 2021. And you're still requesting less money for the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, the agency headed by Dr. Fauci, the agency that is taking the lead in responding to COVID-19. In the middle of this pandemic, how can you possibly justify cutting spending from Dr. Fauci's agency and cutting billions of dollars in federal health spending in the next fiscal year, which starts just 4 months from now?
Thank you for the question, Senator, and for noting that we, both in our budget and in our budget amendment, increased funding for the CDC's fight against infectious diseases. We had originally had a 3% increase. We amended our budget because resource needs changed to have a 15% increase. CDC under the amended budget would have an increase of 8%. In that amendment, we had an increase as well for NIAID within NIH. In terms of overall from HHS's perspective, they're about a $100 billion agency. And we believe that even places like NIH, and I support, and the president supports basic health research, that it's important for all agencies to be able to look and find out where they can do things more efficiently. And we have found, even at CDC, there's things on the occupational health side, various studies that have been done that we don't think are as much of a priority given their important work to fight infectious diseases. And that's the conversation we wanted to have with the Hill.
Well, Mr. Vogt, thank you for the answer, but let me just be really clear. It is one thing to launch a careful cost efficiency kind of review of an agency. I would suggest to you that in the middle of a pandemic where most people think that the executive branch's efforts have been stretched, to say the least, and ineffective and wanting in some areas, the thought of underfunding the agency at this critical time, instead of looking at what the needs are to meet this moment, is inappropriate and reflects poor judgment. Let's move on to another issue. As we discuss spending priorities and the government's role in responding to a public health crisis, I want to emphasize how important it is for agencies to commit resources to improving the quality of federal information technology. These improvements will allow the government to more efficiently and effectively deliver on its mission, maintain a robust cybersecurity posture, and prepare for and respond to unexpected circumstances. Recently, we've seen how the federal response to COVID-19 was hampered by aging IT systems across the government, whether it was the IRS struggling to disperse millions of economic relief payments or SBA's E-Tran website crashing as it tried to roll out the Payroll Protection Program. Do you agree that the federal government's aging technology slowed its response to COVID-19 and delayed critical aid and services from getting to the American people?
Well, I would just say that I agree that the aging information technology is a problem for all of government. It had its implications with regard to this response and recovery. We've seen it personally because we have had, there's a small portion of OMB that's called the U.S. Digital Service that works hand in hand with agencies to provide technical assistance, and they've been deployed with states to help out on the UI front and with various agencies throughout this. And so your concern continues to be our concern, and we want to make sure we work together to make sure that when we spend $80–90 billion per year for IT maintenance and improvement, that when we're in the midst of a crisis and when we're in a steady state, that we have every opportunity to have the American people get the service that they deserve.
Well, can you elaborate and fairly briefly, please, on what steps you will take, if confirmed, to prioritize federal IT modernization investments and help agencies achieve their modernization goals. Because in my experience, this is one of the things that gets pushed to the side. Again, when broad cuts are made without being thoughtful about them, this is the type of thing that gets delayed and delayed. So what specific steps can you take?
Well, sure. And I would just say, and I'll try to do it briefly, when we've constructed budgets on behalf of the president, we've never shorted down IT when an agency has come forward and said this is important from that standpoint. We have also prioritized the Technology Modernization Fund because we think it's a vital way to move around some of the legacy issues that we have. But OFCIO, one of the offices at OMB, will continue to make a push to move beyond these old systems and move things towards digitally and cloud-based services. And you have my commitment to work on that.
Well, thank you for that. I'm going to turn now to a couple of questions for Mr. Lean. Mr. Lean, in recent weeks, President Trump has removed several inspectors general and acting inspectors general for doing their jobs, the jobs that they were assigned under federal law, giving honest assessments about failures in federal agencies and among federal officials. This comes at a time when at least 100,000 Americans have died from the COVID-19 pandemic, millions have lost their jobs, and Congress has dedicated trillions of dollars to recovery. Taxpayers are depending on all of us to make sure that money is spent appropriately, and inspectors general are vital to accountability. But given the president's recent actions, I'm skeptical that he is nominating independent individuals to these roles. You've stated that when necessary, you are willing to speak truth to power. Do you stand by this statement even now as inspectors general across the government are being targeted for their findings?
I do commit to that, speaking truth to power. That's something I've done my entire career.
If you are confirmed, how do you plan to navigate the tension between performing your duties and an administration that's trying to block oversight?
Well, I'm not going to necessarily accept that premise. I've been nominated, and I believe that I'm being asked to be an inspector general and to do my work. It's really between President and Congress about inspectors general as a matter of policy. What I can promise you is that the main thing is you can't be worried about keeping your job. You just have to go into it, do your work, and if I lose my job because any president decides to remove me with the 30 days notice under the IG Act, then I'll get another job. But the main thing is to keep my reputation and to do my work well. And I will, I commit to you.
Well, thank you. And I see that I'm out of time, Mr. Chair. I would look forward to further discussion with you, Mr. Lean, about why you don't accept the premise, but we'll leave that to another day. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.